Dark screen with a single candle. Faint crackling fire. No music. Narrator. Calm, steady, slightly slow but natural. Have you ever wondered if you could survive in another time? Not just visit, but live there. Wake up there. Fall asleep there. Tonight, we take you to feudal Japan. A world of samurai swords, silent castles, and rules that could end your life before breakfast. You might imagine it as beautiful. And it was. But beauty, in feudal Japan, had a sharp edge. Here is a question to hold in your mind as you close your eyes. If you were born a peasant, a warrior, or even a lord, how many days would you truly last? Would you bow correctly? Would you know which side of the road to walk on? Would you speak without permission and vanish by sunset? Stay with me, softly, slowly, slowly. And before sleep takes you, you will learn 4 quiet truths about feudal Japan. Truths that explain why most of us would not last a single day. Pause 2 seconds. If this gentle history helps you rest, consider subscribing to Little Historical. And if you find value in these quiet stories, like tells the algorithm, more sleep, less noise. Now, breathe in, breathe out, and let us step carefully into the past. Have you ever considered what it truly meant to be a woman alone in feudal Japan, not just unseen, but utterly powerless in a world built on swords and silence? Picture a narrow street of packed earth, flanked by high wooden walls that block out the sky, and you are walking there, not as a visitor, but as a wife, a servant, or perhaps a woman with no name at all. You lower your eyes because to meet the gaze of a samurai is to invite a blade, and you step aside because your body does not belong to you when a warrior passes. But the real weight is not in your feet, it is in your chest, that slow, heavy knowing that your value is measured only by the man who claims you. A father, a husband, a son, any man could decide your fate with a single word. If you please him, you eat. If you displease him, you vanish. And there is no one to ask where you went. The night does not listen. The lords do not care. Your neighbors dare not speak. In this world, a woman's fear is not a scream. It is a long, quiet breath held for years. Imagine being married to a man you have never seen, a stranger whose touch you must endure because refusal means shame, and shame means abandonment. And abandonment in feudal Japan is a slow death. You learn to read his moods in the twitch of his hand, the angle of his sake cup, the silence before he speaks your name. And you learn that your body is a bargaining chip, traded for rice, for peace, for a lord's favor. The courtesans of the pleasure districts, they at least wear silk and know the rules of their cage. But the farmer's wife, the merchant's daughter, the widow left with nothing, they wear tattered cotton and a terror that never leaves their eyes. There is a kind of intimacy in survival. A dark, unspoken bargain you make with yourself each night. You give a little of your soul to keep your skin safe. You smile when you want to weep. You whisper yes when every bone in your body screams no. And the man beside you, your husband, your master, he never asks what you feel because your feelings are not his concern. Your duty is his right. Your silence is his peace. This is not a history of grand battles or famous names. This is the history of a million unnamed women who learned to make themselves small, to move like shadows through rooms where men decided everything. And the most haunting part is not the cruelty they endured, but how ordinary it was, how expected, how no one ever called it by its true name. So, as you lie there in your warm room, with walls that are yours and a door that locks from the inside. Consider this. In feudal Japan, a woman's greatest enemy was not the bandit or the famine. It was the quiet permission given to every man to own her. And that, more than any sword, is why you would not have lasted a single night, let alone a day. But the story does not end with her silence, because even in that crushing darkness, some women found a way to whisper back, to bend the rules without breaking, to survive in ways that no history book records. And that is where we turn next, into the hidden corners, where a woman's cunning became her only weapon, and her secrets kept her alive. And so we step now into those hidden corners, the places where history forgets to look because it was too busy watching men draw swords and sign treaties. You see, the peasant woman of feudal Japan could not change her station, but she could learn to read the air around her like a map of survival. Imagine waking before the sun, not to the sound of an alarm, but to the ache in your own bones, knowing that today will be exactly like yesterday and every day before it, except for the small, terrible variations that could ruin everything. Your husband leaves at dawn to work the rice paddies, and you are left alone in a house of paper and wood, where every whisper travels through the walls like a secret you never wanted to share. The neighbors listen, the old woman down the lane watches, and the samurai who passes by once a week, he sees everything and nothing because your face is just another face among the faceless. But here is the truth they never tell you in the poems about cherry blossoms. A woman alone in that house had power, not the kind that men respect, but the kind that grows in shadows. She knew which herbs could stop a fever and which could stop a heart. She knew which neighbor to trust with a whispered warning and which to feed sweet lies to keep her children safe. When the tax collector came, she knew how to bow so low that he might overlook the missing sack of rice. When her husband drank too much sake and his hand grew heavy, she knew exactly where to stand in the room, exactly how to turn her face, so the blow glanced off her shoulder instead of her teeth. These were not victories. They were survival stitches, sewn one by one into a quilt of dread. And yet, even in that suffocating world, there were women who learned to weaponize their own fragility. A tear at the right moment could spare a life. A fever, real or feigned, could delay a marriage. A whispered rumor about a rival could destroy her without ever raising a voice. This was the silent warfare of the helpless, and it was brutal in its own quiet way. But the most dangerous secret of all, the one that could get a woman killed or saved, was the knowledge of what happened behind closed doors in the Lord's manor, where wives were traded like horses and daughters were sold to settle debts. And some women, the cleverest ones, learned to listen at those doors, to collect the shame of the powerful like coins hidden in a wooden chest. They never spent those coins openly. They waited, they watched, and sometimes, when the moment was perfect, they used a single word to change everything. But even that power came with a price, because in feudal Japan, a woman who knew too much was a woman who rarely grew old. And so, we must ask ourselves, as the fire crackles and your eyes grow heavy, what did she do when the walls closed in and no one was coming to save her? The answer waits just ahead, in the darkest hour before dawn, when even the bravest samurai sleeps, and a woman's true story finally begins to speak. The darkest hour before dawn, when even the bravest samurai sleeps, and a woman's true story finally begins to speak. That hour belongs to her alone, not to her husband who lies drunk and snoring on the thin mat beside her, not to the children who dream of rice balls and running through fields, but to her, the woman who has learned to be awake when the world demands she be unconscious. She rises without a sound, her feet memorizing the creak of each wooden floorboard, her breath held in a cage between her teeth. What does she do in that sacred, stolen time? She does the one thing that cannot be taken from her. She remembers. She remembers the face of the girl she was before marriage, stole her name, before a man she never chose, placed his hand on her neck and called it love. She touches the small bundle hidden beneath the floor, a piece of fabric from her mother, a sharp stone that fits perfectly in her palm, a dried flower pressed between two scraps of paper. These are her treasures, worthless to anyone else, priceless to her because they prove she existed before she became invisible. But there is another thing she does in that hour, something far more dangerous. She plans. Not a rebellion, not an escape, because where would she go? The road leads only to another village, another house, another man. No, she plans something smaller and far more cunning. She decides which neighbor to befriend and which to avoid. She calculates how much rice to hide each week before her husband notices. She rehearses the exact words she will say to the merchant's wife who saw too much last Tuesday. And sometimes, on the rarest of nights, she allows herself to imagine a different life, not a grand one with silk robes and servants, but a quiet one where her body belongs to her alone, where she can sleep without one eye open, where the touch of another human being is offered freely or not at all. This imagining is her rebellion, and it is more powerful than any sword because it cannot be killed. You can burn her, drown her, lock her in a cage, but you cannot stop her from dreaming in the dark. And the men of feudal Japan, for all their armor and all their honor, never understood this. They thought they owned her because they owned her labor, her womb, her silence. But they never owned the hour before dawn. They never owned the small, fierce thing that lived behind her eyes and whispered, "I am still here. I am still here. I am still here." But even this secret strength has its limits, because a woman who dreams too loudly in a world that forbids her voice must eventually face a terrible choice. Does she stay small and safe, or does she risk everything for a single breath of freedom? That choice, and the price it demands, waits for us in the final chapter, where the silence finally breaks, and a woman's whisper becomes something the samurai cannot ignore. That choice, and the price it demands, waits for us in the final chapter, where the silence finally breaks, and a woman's whisper becomes something the samurai cannot ignore. You see, every woman in feudal Japan faced the same cruel arithmetic. How much of yourself do you surrender to survive? And what do you keep hidden so that you remain human? The ones who lasted the longest, who grew old with their teeth still in their mouths and their minds still their own, they were not the bravest or the strongest. They were the ones who understood that power in a cage looks nothing like power in a castle. They learned to smile at the man who owned them while secretly building alliances with the women around them, a network of glances and half-sentences, of favors traded in the well at dawn when no men were watching. One woman would lend her extra salt to another, and that debt would be repaid not in salt, but in a warning when danger came. A younger woman would brush the hair of an elder, and the elder would teach her which mushrooms were safe and which made a husband sleep so deeply he never woke. These were not crimes, not yet, but they were threads, and threads woven together become rope, and rope can strangle or save. But there was a line that some women crossed, a line so thin it was almost invisible, and once crossed there was no return. That line was intimacy with the forbidden, not the crude kind that fills the gossip of servants, but the quiet, desperate intimacy of two souls who see each other fully in a world that demands they look away. Perhaps it was a widow and a wandering merchant who stayed one night too long. Perhaps it was a wife and her husband's younger brother who looked at her with something other than ownership. Perhaps it was two women, which the law did not even have a name for, finding in each other's arms the only softness they had ever known. These connections were death if discovered, not because the act itself was evil, but because they represented the one thing feudal Japan could not tolerate: a woman choosing. Choosing whom to touch. Choosing whom to trust. Choosing her own heart over the order of men. And yet, they chose anyway, in barns after dark, in forests where the trees hid their shadows, in the brief, stolen moments between the rice harvest and the winter freeze. They chose because to never choose is a death of another kind, slower but just as final. And some of them were caught. Some of them disappeared from village records with no explanation, their names erased as if they had never breathed. But some of them, the cleverest and the luckiest, lived to be old women with secrets pressed between their ribs like dried flowers. They would never tell, but they would never forget. And as you drift now towards sleep, with your own warm blankets and your own locked door, ask yourself this: what would you have chosen in her place? Would you have stayed small and safe, or would you have risked everything for one true glance across a darkened room? The answer, like the woman herself, remains hidden in the hour before dawn, where no history book dares to go.